Now that you're all eating, I'll spoil your life. Okay, we'll talk about food recalls. And food product recalls is what we're going to do. This is one of probably about 5 websites that the FDA puts out. This is a very good consumer site. It's called foodsafety.gov, and they have all sorts of food information and food safety plans. But what I wanted to show you is it's an easy site to go to because September 18th at 11:02 p.m., okay, U.S. Lipton Company voluntarily recalled milk chocolate flavored coated wafer with hazelnut cream filling and white chocolate flavor, okay, as a precautionary measure because the allergen statement did not include wheat, all right? Food product recall. The simple fact is that the product contains wheat. Their allergen statement on their label did not say either manufactured in a place that contains wheat or may contain wheat-based flour products, right? In terms of what's in the ingredient list. You can find these every day. This one goes through all of the different ones. Okay, McCormick and Company, all right? Notice on Me Here taco seasoning. So if you go to Dillon's and you buy the taco seasoning, or actually, this will be a regional brand that's made by McCormick. If you bought this bottle, it has an unlabeled milk allergen. So in other words, the product probably contains a little bit of lactose or a little bit of milk protein, right? But it's not on the label. So if you had a milk allergy, then this product is not life-threatening to you, but it could make you sick, right? From that particular aspect. So you go to foodsafety.gov, you can go to any number of these places and see if I can remember how Andy told me to do this. There we go. Okay. Find information on products that have been recalled. This is me, Glen McNeil. I'm the interim dean for College of Health and Behavioral Sciences. I taught at HHP for years. My background is primarily food and nutrition. I'm a dietitian with a master's level in food service management and a lot of experience in different areas related to food service and what we see. They always say you're supposed to put a disclaimer on the beginning of the presentation, so there's mine. I got a lot of this stuff from the web. The pictures are out there, the information's out there. When I'm all done, I'm going to give it back. There is a list at the end, too, of the primary sources used in the presentation and what we see. So, product recalls. And if you have questions, stop me anytime as we go along. I'll be glad just to stop and discuss what happens. Product recalls, and especially in this case, we're looking at food. Now, it's not only human food, it's animal food, too, that fits into this process. A product recall comes out when there is a product that has some oversight by the FDA in it, okay, or any one of the FDA agencies, and it may be potentially harmful. Just like not mentioning the milk products or mentioning the fact that it may have nuts or been processed where nuts were. All right, that fits into that potentially harmful for an individual. So then what happens, what you want to try to do is remove that product from the market. You want to do more than just tell people, okay? So we have the recall process, and then that basically means we're going to go get them. And I can tell you how that works because at one point in time I worked for a product recall company. And it's kind of cool because what I would do is get up every morning and there would be an email. And in my email, they would tell me what products were being recalled, where they were found within my region, which was Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, Oklahoma, Colorado. Went a little bit into Texas, but not very far. And I think I only went to South Dakota once. Okay, but there would be those, that would be in my email. And then they tell me where I had to go and what I had to pick up. Sometimes I would go pick up one item. One time I went and I picked up probably 100 boxes of cereals. 100 boxes of cereal, one brand, from little markets all over northwest Kansas and southern Nebraska because there was a problem with the label. I brought all those boxes of cereal home, opened them up, threw them away, threw the boxes away. And then I had to document pictures that I was doing that. One of my other product recalls one time is I drove 180 miles round trip, picked up a can of green beans. That was it. Okay, the customer got home with the can, bought a can of green beans, got home, opened them up, was gonna pour them in a pan and cook it for supper, and there was a grasshopper laying on top of it. So the grasshopper got in the processing process and got processed right along with the green beans. So it's canned grasshopper, they could eat it, there wouldn't have been any problem with it, but they were a little put off by the fact that it had a grasshopper in it. So my job, they paid me to drive up and get it. Now in that case, I had to package it in dry ice, ship it back to the manufacturer as actual proof that it was there. A number of times I would get sent to markets to go in and buy everything of one particular brand in a frozen food case. So I might go to Dillon's and they would say this particular brand of frozen corn has been recalled for a reason. So I would go in and I would buy everything off of the shelf. Or I would go in and I would see the manager and I would say, I have a product recall for this, everything off of the shelf, what's in your storeroom? Okay, I pay for it, take it, ship it back into the company. It was really kind of fun to get out and see, but you spend a lot of time in the car. Right, going out and doing those particular types of things. And I learned a lot about products and product recalls and how they work. So we're looking at how to protect the public here and what we're going to do with these product recalls. Recalls are almost, probably 95% of them are voluntary. The manufacturers will recall the product. One, they can't stand the negative publicity, yet there's a ton of negative publicity that comes out about the recall when it does reach the national level. But manufacturers do a tremendous amount of this in terms of the recall for the products. Now, other time, and it may be that the manufacturer identifies something in the processing that's wrong, or they get a number of complaints about a product and it gets recalled. There are other times when the FDA gets complaints. They usually come in via the Center for Disease Control where people got sick. They go out and investigate. Then the manufacturer still does a voluntary recall. The FDA can come in though and say, you have to recall that product. Now most of the time they're voluntary because the manufacturers really do want to get them out of the marketplace in terms of that. 2017, there were 438 reported recalls, right, that went national. There might have been others that, many of these are what we call regional. Okay, where it may be in a 3 or 4 or 5 state region, and the little map over the left-hand side shows you there were 5 particular states involved in this recall. Well, that's called a national recall, even though it's regional, because it was greater than, say, Hayes or Ellis, just Hayes and Ellis, or something like that. So 438 recalls. These were some of them. I don't know if you remember Honey Smacks. That was huge. Every grocery store across the United States had to pull all their Honey Smacks off because of salmonella contamination during processing. And they still don't know why or how it got in the process, but they knew exactly what lot numbers. Whenever you look on a product, it's got a code on it. That code tells you the plant it was made in, the date it was processed, okay? The code contains information on where the flour or the other ingredients in terms of the Honey Smacks, where it was all purchased from. So they can go back to where it was made, where it was canned, and the ingredients were purchased. And they pulled, it took them about 2 weeks to pull all the Honey Smacks off. And I don't know if you remember, I don't have it up here, but Goldfish was a real big one last year too. And the one in Goldfish was a more extensive one because they were notifying stores, it was on TV, it was on the radio. If you have Goldfish with this particular date sequence on them, just throw them away or take them back to the store for credit. And again, it was a contamination process that goes on. You see some of the other ones. There's been a couple of really big pet food recalls lately. Anybody in here serve their pet, the fresh pet foods that you get out of the dairy case, or some of them called the meat pet foods, what they are? There's been 3 or 4 of those recalled lately. For the same reason they might recall products for humans, E. coli and salmonella. Still make pet sick and make a human sick if they handle that food and then don't wash their hands effectively in terms of that. So we've seen those. I'm guessing everybody knows about Chipotle, okay, and their problems. Their food products fit in the recall list because you were told if you ate there, you should go. Well, theirs weren't food. That was poor sanitation through employees, okay, and they actually had 2 shutdowns where they did training on them. So far, they've been really good since they've gone through that process. But it fit the recall. Ground beef often gets recalled for E. coli 057, one particular variety of E. coli. right? Comes primarily from the intestinal tract of animals, and it gets in there by improper processing or sanitation. Problem with E. coli 5.7 is it can be in your ground beef, so long as you handle it properly, cook it well past 145 degrees, it's fine to eat. Okay, but if you don't handle it properly and you don't cook it far enough, you don't destroy the bacteria, it gets in your intestinal tract and it causes bloody diarrhea, causes intestinal cramping, loss of appetite, blurred vision. But the really big thing that it does is it causes causes renal shutdown and liver insufficiency. And if you're what they call as a danger zone person, a very young child or a very old person, it can kill you. That's the big one that Jack in the Box had about 20 years ago. And that's the one you hear. So that's the one you normally see with meat. What you normally see with the salads is salmonella or some E. coli, or the big one these days in salads, bag salads that's in that, is a bacteria called Listeria. Listeria is really interesting, and I'll touch on that in a little bit and what goes on. So other things, eggs are common, where you get handling problems or salmonella in eggs. So all of these fit into this 438. Of that 438 in the recalls, 131 of them were animal products. Meat, chicken, poultry, pork. Down on the bottom is what you see is sometimes that, and a few fish. It shows you on the bottom of that where those major recalls were. And in the column, number of recalls there in the first column, and the column on the right, look at the pounds of product that was recalled. And if you figure just hamburger at what, $4 a pound, okay, 20 million pounds of that recall. So it's a huge factor in cost effectiveness in terms of this. And you can see under the recalls, okay, I really can't see it too well, there's a picture of E. coli. Listeria is next in that. Listeria shows up a lot of times in fresh fruits, vegetables, and salads. Listeria gets into that because the water system gets contaminated, then the fields are watered with contaminated water, and it usually comes from human fecal material. Then it gets on the plant, and then when they harvest it, it's there, and so you get it. Listeria is a really interesting one because if you get E. coli, within 24 hours you have flu-like symptoms, right? Most of the time it passes within 48 hours. Listeria, if you get contaminated, a listeria contamination, it may sit in your gastrointestinal tract for 2 weeks before you get any type of reaction. And because of that, listeria is very hard to follow. We're looking at ages. Most of you probably don't remember, about 5 to 7 years ago, there's a cantaloupe growing area in western Oklahoma and southern Colorado. They had cantaloupe contaminated with listeria. There was something happened with their water treatment plant in the area. The groundwater got contaminated. They watered the cantaloupe with it, but they didn't know it. The cantaloupe was contaminated with listeria. They showed up at grocery stores. People took them home, and if you washed them off good, okay, before you didn't have to use soap and water, just wash them clean and then cut them, you were okay. If you didn't wash them, cut them with a knife, you introduced the listeria to the cantaloupe, the meat of the cantaloupe you were going to eat, and then the contamination passed on to people. It took them almost 4 months to track that down, but they tracked it down to the one field, and it was not the grower's fault, okay, but it still shows up in that process. So you see that. Salmonella is very common, okay, contact through human fecal material or basically soil that people don't wash their hands properly in contact. So those are some of what we see, or some of the reasons we see recalls. What happens? Okay, food manufacturer identifies food safety issue. Something's wrong, right? And whether it's a food safety issue where a consumer comes in, or one of the more common things that we don't always hear about are metal shavings in foods. If you've ever been to a processing plant, they use metal equipment. Okay, most processing plants now, the food as it comes off of the line undergoes magnetic scanners. All right, and if they send a signal off, they pull that piece and then they investigate to see what's there. Okay, so a manufacturer may identify that, okay, in terms of the process. A manufacturer may package and ship something, and something may happen while it's in shipping. Manufacturer identifies it, contacts the FDA, they come in, look at it, okay, so they're going to pull it off the market for a while. FDA may do the inspection. Anybody here from Wichita? big ice cream factory in Wichita is?
The Highland?
Not Highlands. I don't think it's Highlands.
I know we have a
Blue Bunny. A big Blue Bunny factory in Wichita, then another one in Oklahoma, and Georgia again. What was their issue 2 years ago? It was listeria. Okay, and what they found was that it was a contaminated milk product that contaminated one of their stainless steel work areas. And they had made this product, they sent it to a hospital, a couple of people in the hospital ate it, got sick, they tracked it all the way back to Blue Bunny, and then they also found it in one or two of their other plants. They shut them down, they went in, they cleaned everything, they came back up, they've been fine ever since then, a couple of years ago. Okay, but that one came about because of that. Now, Food and Drug Administration is FDA, FSIS, Food Service Information Service, Inspection Service. That's a branch of the FDA that gets involved in these processes. Manufacturing testing fails. FDA collects samples. If you've ever been to a plant when the FDA is there, they just simply go up on the line and take a sample, put it in a bottle, and ship them off. And they're tested. And if something comes back negative in the test, they go to the code, they pull the product, okay, that goes off with it. So we find that in terms of sampling. And then Center for Disease Control. This is where you tend to get more of what happened to Chipotle, right? Where people went, they ate, within 24 hours, a local health agency had reports of 30 people who were in the hospital with flu-like symptoms. When interviewed, the only thing they all had in common is they all ate at the same restaurant. So the CDC gets called in on this, they do an investigation, okay, you're done. Or one of the other recalls I did one time was on frozen fish, that there was a complaint about a particular frozen fish product because a number of people throughout southern Nebraska bought a particular product and got sick. The CDC came in, the local health department, people brought in samples, they tested them, and they were bad. Okay, it was contaminated with a certain toxin. And so what I got was a whole list of home addresses to go pick product. None of it was in the store anymore, but that was a recall that was done. That was not publicized, okay, in terms of the way that particular recall that was done. So food safety and inspection service, all right, part of the USDA. So you can't say the government isn't trying to help make our food supply safe. It's not only the government's problem. You got to realize that you have to be an informed consumer, the manufacturer has to be informed, the producer has to be informed. Everybody plays a role in this. Oversight falls under the government. Okay, part of the USDA, voluntary action, general in terms of that food recall. Okay, recalls are initiated by the manufacturer and distribute meat and poultry products, and what we see with those. So it's a combination of the government and manufacturers, okay, and how we see this. The FSIS really, down in the bottom one, okay, doesn't get involved until a product enters commerce. It's shipped, it's opened and consumed, it's prepared and served. All right, that's where they really get involved and start tracking things, when it starts to get out of the locale in which it was made. Okay, so there's a difference between recalls and how they operate in those particular areas. Next step that comes along, if there's a recall, we're going to notify the public, if it reaches the point that it's serious enough to notify the public. So only when there's a serious concern about it. You don't want everybody running around if the concerns are not that great. So usually it has to be a very service concern, and not all of them are in the media. But that little food safety link I showed you to begin with, they're posted there daily there, whether they meet the media, full media attention or not. And then there's a couple government, you can go to USDA.gov and then do a search for food recalls, and you can get this real extensive list that comes up with it. And it talks about every single little thing that's going on anywhere. And you can see why when you look at some of them that they're not sent out to the public, because first of all, the product may not even make it to the public if they catch it early enough in that process and what they see. There's a recall classification box, right? What we find is that there's 3 classifications for recalls. If you get a hold of this information when it comes out, class 1 is the most dangerous, all right? Extremely can affect someone's health, extremely negative, can result in death. If you're allergic to peanuts and there's peanuts that show up in a product and it doesn't say it has peanuts in it, you did your job by reading the label, you have a peanut allergy and you weren't prepared for it, you could die from anaphylactic shock. Okay, something along that nature. That's a class 1 that fits in there. Okay, in terms class 2, temporary health problem, gastrointestinal discomfort, diarrhea, something along that, but really not life-threatening. You're going to be sick in most cases, but it's really not life-threatening. And then the class 3 products, not much really happens, okay? Minor container defect, lack of English in a retail label or something. These are the real simple little ones. And a lot of times they're caught. On these class 3 ones, sometimes you'll see a product get to the market, okay? And then it's advertised. So you go to the store and you try to buy it, but it's not there. Okay, what happens is they find in class 3 is a mislabeling of a product. There were a couple of cereal products a few years ago that were put out, and they made a claim in the cereal products about effective treatment for cardiovascular disease. Well, the cereal products contained soluble fibers. Soluble fibers are not a treatment for cardiovascular disease, but they were advertising them on TV with that on the product label. And we were watching TV one night, so Terry and I quick went to the store, and there it was, on the store, you know, in that particular product. And so, you know, we didn't buy any, we just wanted to go look and see if it was, next day it was all gone, okay, because somebody identified that in the label. So you'll find that sometimes, or you go in one time, product label looks one way, you go in the next time, looks totally different, all right? What happened is somebody in a class 3 FDA or some organization noticed something in that label that was not correct. So they pull it and they make them fix it. It's not like you could stick a warning label on them and sell it. They won't allow to do that. They pull the product and then make them correct the label that goes on with it.
Which class is the most common?
Most common is probably going to be your 2 and 3. Okay. I would say the most common of all is going to be the 3. And that's going to be, now you run an issue here. Class 3 may be the issue, class 1 though could be the result. Nuts, wheat, allergens. So now you sort of cross over a little bit. But the one you hear more about is mislabeling products than anything else. Yeah.
Which one is most common to get corrected by the FDA rather than like the company itself?
Well, to get them corrected, it's going to be the correction process will determine on how they get into the class. The FDA will come in as soon as somebody identifies it. Now, if it's a recall, the manufacturer may notify the FDA and then simply recall the product. The FDA can come in and say, you have to recall the product. Most manufacturers don't force it. If there's any question at all, that's what they tend to do. I think in the media, what you tend to see are more of the class 2 and 3. You see the salads, you see the eggs that noted for different varieties of E. coli and salmonella, or having metal shavings, you know, or maybe contaminated with salt, okay, some ingredient that was not there on the product. Okay, the class 1, I don't know that you find so many class 1s unless it is specific to a particular allergen. So and now the class 1 would be undeclared allergens. So in other words, my daughter has an allergy to black olives. So if she goes and buys a salad product and it's got black olives in it, it should declare an allergen to a certain type of protein, and if it doesn't, then that becomes a class 1. So it's kind of difficult to say. It varies. Long answer, short question. Yes.
I don't know if you're gonna go over this later, but like, are there laws or, you know, things where it's like, there's like a forced procedure to like alert the public if it does fall under one of these or like certain standards?
It depends a little bit on where you go, okay, in terms of what you see. The FDA publishes, all right? If they are class 1, it will make the media. Now, it may only make the regional media and then be picked up and go national.
Okay, but
Okay.
how does that happen? Does it just happen because someone like who's a reporter, like, finds out about it from the website, or is there like a process where the FDA or whatever group has to?
They
or-
send out, the FDA will send out notifications to news feeds,
Okay.
especially if you're looking at something that is dangerous to your health. They'll send out the notification to the news feed so that it is picked up.
Okay.
Now, some of the class 3 ones, no, they don't really put it out to the news feeds because it's really not gonna have a major effect on anybody. Okay, and then it goes very, very rarely do they send it to a national news feed. It's usually to the locale where the problem is, and then the major networks pick it up, and you start to hear about, if you remember the bag salad issue in Michigan a couple of years ago. It was only in Michigan, yet news agencies all across the country picked it up, and the sale of bag salads from all companies dropped way down for a while. Yet it was only one brand, and it was only sold in Michigan. But simply the fact is, and that's what they're trying to avoid, is putting it out nationally, and then everybody runs away from a product. That happened with tomatoes, I want to say probably around 2000, that there was a problem with tomatoes grown and imported from Mexico. They had a salmonella contamination. Tomatoes grown within the United States in the Southern California region, the Southern United States regions were just fine, but the media picked it up and it became all tomatoes. And so the sale of tomatoes dropped dramatically for a period of time, and it took quite a bit of effort on the part of the government to come in and correct that. So that's what they try to avoid, yet still inform those people that are in those affected areas. These are, the major ones that we see that get recalled. Okay, so you can see there's quite a few things on the list, but the bottom one is the one that we tend to focus on a little bit more than anything. The majority of the recalls are associated with food. So it's not just food recalls, there are other things that fit in there. Okay, but just talking today about foods because of that, and putting animal foods in because I know of at least 2 animal food recalls in the last 2 months. And, some people are very attached to their pets. Okay, my sister is probably more attached to her pets than she is to her husband. I always told him that anything ever happens to the dog, you're second place. He just laughed. Yes.
Do they do like recalls for livestock food too then, or just like cat food?
They can. Okay, it will depend on what the concerns or the conditions are that are identified in the fact. Any food product in the chain can fit into this particular process. Anything agricultural, processed products can fit into the chain. Okay, and so they do get recalled. I've kind of been through these: pathogen contamination, and the 3 most common: E. coli, Listeria, and Salmonella. Foreign objects. Have you ever gone somewhere, bought something to eat, found a foreign object in it? What'd you find?
I was at McDonald's one time and they found it was like a little tiny rubber piece that looked like it was off some sort of mixer, but it wasn't anything at their store, so apparently back in the high school process it
So somewhere a piece of it got in. Anybody else? We went to a Cracker Barrel one time to eat, and I ordered the fried fish. And the fish was really good, but as I cut into the second piece of fried fish, the blue plastic wrapping was in the breading. And so I cut the piece of fish open to eat it, and here comes this piece of blue plastic about the length of my finger and the width of my finger. Pulled it out, and the manager came by and apologized, gave me a new meal. It happens. We ate, we stopped at one place and ate, and got meatloaf, mashed potatoes, gravy, green beans, and biscuits is what I had. And the meatloaf was great. Took a spoonful of mashed potatoes, and here came this long, thin piece of cellophane. Well, they had the mashed potatoes sitting on the hot food line. They peeled the cellophane off, and a piece of it apparently ripped along the edge and got mixed in with my mashed potatoes. Okay, I took my boys to a football game one time, and we stopped to eat salads. Well, we stopped to eat, went home, and on the way home, and my youngest one ordered a salad, and he stuck his fork in the salad, and he got vegetables and something else, and right in the middle of the vegetables, there's this huge chunk of white plastic. Okay, so just things that get in, that's foreign objects that get in there. Sometimes you can do things about them, sometimes you can't. Okay. The worst one I ever saw was Band-Aids and beef stroganoff. Talk about really freaking you out. Order a meal, and I was working in the kitchen at that, okay, where we opened the beef stroganoff. Of course, you know, it comes frozen, you reheat it, dump it out, and you reheat it, and you start to stir it up, and here's these Band-Aids, okay? Not out of the package and Band-Aids. So we called our boss called the company called, I don't know, whoever he called at that point in time, I didn't know that much, so it was the FDA who came in. They went through all the boxes that we had and found 2 others that were contaminated with the same lot numbers. What we were told later on is they went back to the company and they found a disgruntled employee on the packing line. Okay. So, you know, and remember the Tylenol thing, all of that happens.
Don't they, in like food plants have different rules? Like my parents worked at this cheese plant and if they had a Band-Aid, they'd use certain ones that had like a little bit of metal in it so that it would
So
go
it shows
off.
up
Yeah,
if it does
would
come
fall
up.
off.
And then they run the food under magnets.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Do they
it
have
varies.
that like in a lot of plants or do they just?
It will depend on the plant and depend on what the company does. It's a safety procedure. They have that, you know, the wearing of gloves now is a big thing in food processing. Sometimes they use a special Band-Aid regarding the type of adhesive, okay? I don't know if you've ever seen the finger condoms that people wear, okay, that they like tiny little condoms, and you, if you got a cut on your finger, you slide it over your finger. And that way you don't have to wear, you know, a full glove or a glove that doesn't fit well in terms of that. Hair nets, hats, anything to protect what you do in terms of the process. Nutrient balance, sometimes you see this in pet foods where they're real high in sodium, allergens that show up in different types of things, okay? That's what you look at, you know, and what we see is part of the reason we see a lot of recalls. The sulfites has come big. Sulfites were huge about 10 years ago. Most of them are gone from the food chain now. That's how they used to preserve lunch meats and things. But they would cause you to break out in hives, other things. Yes.
So you might address this later, but regarding kind of current events with Hurricane Florence, I heard maybe in the Carolinas there's been issues with maybe open swine
Saw that on the,
waste pools.
yeah, I saw that on the news the other night. What they're concerned about there is that with all the flooding, okay, and it's not just the swine pits, okay, in this kind of part of the country, you probably look at cattle pits, okay, the big concern is the swine pits are part of it, but also waste treatment plants, that when they flood, fresh water comes in, contaminated water rises to the surface, it goes out. Okay, so now it's spread wherever you go. So what you're hearing right now in the Carolinas is they're telling people, if you get out and you walk in the water in the streets, if you walk in the water in your house, wear protected boots, wear protected clothing, as soon as you can, get in and wash yourself off. Because that bacteria that's in those different types of products, in those different types of contaminated areas, just spreads like wildfire in the water. And then as the water starts to sit, it spreads even faster. That's usually a major issue in homes that are flooded. And then the process of mold contamination that goes on with it. Yeah, you'll hear that not only in the Carolinas. If you remember a few years ago, they had some flooding in the southern Mississippi area. And it was a huge concern in the surrounding communities because they had some chicken processing plants. And their ponds were flooded out, so it's a concern for people downriver.
And even maybe the refineries along the coasts might add to that. I mean, on a different
Most of the
level.
concern for the refineries is just keeping things intact within the refinery. They're not worried too much about flooding and polluting the water. And I have a son who's a chemical engineer at one of them, okay? And when you go down and visit him, everything is that high off the ground, okay? They're used to water coming into the plant just continues to operate. Everything is enclosed, everything. They don't have open pools of anything in those chemical plants, those refineries. So most of them, I mean, I've talked to him when they've been on the Gulf Coast, when there's a hurricane out there and they're getting 20 inches of rain. He says, well, I'm at work, Dad. You know, and I'll say, in the hurricane, he says, oh yeah, he says, you put your boots on and you just go to work. They're more worried about alligators getting into the plant than they are anything else down there. But that's what, he tells me that most, when you look at those plants, kind of built up. So, and they don't have open pools. Now, that's a federal regulation that guides them. But yeah, it was on the news last night about being careful about walking in water or stagnant water. They had that concern in North Wichita a couple of years ago. They had a couple mobile home parks that got flooded, and their pits washed out. They told people not to use the water for 2 or 3 days, to boil it before you consumed it. If you walked in it, make sure you went in and took a shower and cleaned it off your skin as soon as possible. Because a cut becomes an open place for contamination. When you look at that. So other things that you see, uneviscerated fish. You know what uneviscerated fish are? You know, fish that haven't been gutted and cleaned. Okay, can grow in terms of contaminants really fast, in terms of the process. So you have to watch that, and especially with catfish. There's a little microbe that infects people with catfish. So most of it in the market is fine. All right, you just have to be a little bit careful from that process. Okay, what do they do in an investigation? Contact the manufacturer, interview anybody who complained about being sick, analyze food samples. Okay, if you operate a facility and somebody says your food made me sick, you hope you have a sample of your food. Okay, that's what you do. You hope you have a sample of food to test so that you can go through that process and what we see. Then here comes Food Safety Inspection Service, and they're going to talk to you about it. Okay, what did you do? What was done? You know, inspection, compliance. Are your people properly protected? You know, from that, do your freezers work at the right temperature? Is your canning process fine? Is it good? Oh, what was it? There was peanut butter a couple of years ago. Peanut butter got tagged for salmonella, and it was not just one. This is where you really learn about foods in our society. Okay, the first one that got hit was Jif peanut butter. Jif or Jiffy? Jif.
Jif.
You might know for sure. Is it Jif or Jiffy?
It's Jif.
Jif? Okay,
Skippy
Jif
and
peanut
Jif.
butter was the first one that got tagged as their peanut butter being contaminated with salmonella because some people got sick. Well, pretty soon, here's a store brand. Here's another store brand. Here's another store brand. Come to find out, they're all processed in the same plant. Okay, you just put different labels on them. I visited a couple food processing plants, and it always amazed me as you're watching in a Van Camp's plant. Okay, they were making Van Camp's pork and beans. I learned a lot about Van Camp's pork and beans, right? That they're mainly tomato sauce, which most people know. There's one tiny little piece of pork fat in them, so they should really be called tomato and beans with pork. But the labeling laws allowed it. So they were making those, and here all these cans of finished pork and beans are rolling by. And of course, you know, there's a little glue machine on 3 little wheels there. They roll across that, you get 3 lines of glue on it. Rolls across the label, and the label's stuck on the can. Here's Van Camp's, here goes Kroger, here goes some other brand. They're all coming out of the same production vat, all going through the same, they're all getting the labels. Now the manufacturer, the plant manager explained it, well, it looks that way, but it's not quite exactly that way. There's a certain series of cans processed in one particular way that rolls across the first 1,000 labels. The next 1,000 cans are processed in a different way, and they roll across the next 1,000 labels. But if you were just there, this is this huge rack of cans rolling across the label. So, I mean, they explained it, but there are differences in the products you buy. But it's just interesting when you see that. Document a chronology of events in terms of the process. Now, who's involved? This gives you a little pictorial thing here. Federal agencies, it shows you that the USDA, the FIS, now comes the FDA, the EPA can get involved, okay, and then the CDC, for Center for Disease Control. Food industry, this is what I was talking about earlier. These people are very aware of what a recall or what a damaged product can do to their reputation. So they, you know, growers, processors, preparation areas, they're all in effect. State and local governments, your local health department. If you all got sick and went to the emergency room and said, you know, we all ate the same thing, right? And out of the 15, 17 people here, if 9 of us got sick, eating at the same event, the health department would be notified. Hospital emergency room would notify the health department. The health department would then investigate, they would pass it on to the CDC would then come in and investigate. And that's where the stats come from your local health departments when you get in that. So then consumers fit in the process. So that's what's involved. Agencies. Congress makes the rules and the regulations. The agencies try to enforce the rules and regulations. And then of course, in the American system, you have the courts in here to decide who's at fault and what people should be compensated for. The different thing here is this. Since agencies are accorded with authority, okay, but it's somewhat ambiguous in their grant of authority. So in other words, they promote the regulations and they try to enforce the regulations, but they may not always have the manpower, money, or the enforcement right to do this. So this huge aspect of voluntary plays a big role in this. Okay. Yes?
You mentioned before earlier that like the FTE would go in and do like inspections and just like kind of sample stuff. But do companies hire other groups to come in and also do tests just to
Sure.
stay proactive? Okay.
Most companies, depending upon the company and the product, most companies will do that. The USDA used to inspect all beef products. Well, what's happened, it's really hard to get USDA inspectors because of the training. People go off and get USDA trained, and then the companies come in and hire them. Say it's cheaper to go hire a trained inspector, to have them come in, be in our plant, inspect our plant on a daily basis, identify things before they go wrong, than it is for the FDA to come in or the USDA to come in and do that. So you have federal governments, and then you have most companies have their own, they may not call them an inspector, they probably call them a sanitation and safety office, and then they're responsible for sanitation within the plant as well as safety training. But then when you start talking about safety training, you got a whole nother group of federal agencies out here coming in all of this process and what goes on. Yeah. So, and I have a good friend of mine that was a USDA inspector, and he got hired away by a meat processing company for about 3 times the amount of money he was making. And you know, he just looks at me and he says, "What do you do? They're going to pay me all this money to do the exact same thing I'm doing, and I'm going to do it for half as many plants as I do for the FDA." So good for him, you know, in that process. Okay, this is the Food Safety Inspection Service, the one we hear more about. Okay, domestic and import meat, and the big one, processed eggs. Okay, this is what we see with this. And then here's all the different things they can do. They can inspect animals. You asked about animal food. They do the animal food that comes along in here. They look at processing plants. If you've ever been to a slaughter or processing plant, there's usually one of these people on board to make sure that it's happening correctly. Okay, in terms of that, they analyze food samples. You know, they look at all the different information that can go into this. And so it's a fairly exhaustive process as to what you see. You've got the FDA, kind of does the same thing. Imported foods, interstate commerce, so anything that travels around the United States, and the different types. They do basically the same thing, but at a different level, okay, in terms of what we see. And then you've got the Environmental Protection Agency. They come in and do the water, and that's where you come into, the EPA is going to come in on the East Coast and say, don't drink the water. Or if you're going to use the water, make sure you boil it for X number of minutes prior to using it, or bottled water, or whatever it is, in terms of that process. They fit into that. Okay, they're also the ones that promote a lot of the pesticide information. You know, don't put too much on your yard because you might be drinking it, right, from that process. Simplification, but that's what they do. And you spend a ton of time on the water standards and what they have out there. And then the Center for Disease Control. They collect all the data from everybody else, and then you can go to the CDC and you can find out how many people within the United States had salmonella that came from eating undercooked products or whatever you want. The CDC categorizes all that. All this stuff gets collected, and that's kind of like that chart I showed you at the beginning. Somebody puts it together in a report, so we know what to watch for. That's part of the government agency or the government in that process. So, pizza, I borrowed this. Okay. Inputs. EPA looks at the chemicals used in raising the product. Okay, the Department of Agriculture with their groups look at the seed that you plant. The FDA looks at what's fed the animal that you're going to get the meat from. Okay, that's the input. Now we look at the farm. The wheat that's grown, the tomatoes that are produced, the beef and pork that's brought in, sold into processing. Now we turn wheat into flour, tomatoes into sauce, basically milk into cheese, and meat, pepperonis, or I prefer ground beef or something of that nature over pepperoni. Then we buy all of that into second level processing, okay? Manufacturer does frozen pizza, meat pizza, then you sell it to the consumer. It goes through all of those levels, and notice EPA, FDA, 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 EPA. These are all specific regulatory agencies that come in there. So if you don't think people are looking out for you, they are, but they don't catch everything. You know, tremendous amount of food processing in the United States as it fits into that process and what we see. Food safety threats, biological, okay, that's out there. Naturally occurring toxins. You have to be really careful if you're a mushroom hunter and shopper, because there are certain mushrooms that you can buy and produce and cook that will make you high. Certain mushrooms you can buy and produce that will kill you. Okay, and then those that kind of fit right in the middle that are just good tasting. Okay, toxins in food process. Dietary supplements, we'll skip that. That's a whole different discussion. Pesticide residues that you find in plants. If you buy organic and naturally grown, there can't be any pesticide residue in there. So you look at that. Toxic metals, we talked about that. Now, toxic metals also here would be like lead in your food. It can come in from your water supply or processing plant. Selenium is a metal. It's a dietary mineral, but it's a metal. And sometimes selenium gets into the food supply. And when it does, you've got to remove the food, because if you consume excessive amounts of selenium, it has some real serious effects on your growth plates, joints, and development issues, especially in children. Decomposition contaminants, that kind of looks at as if you have your own food gardens. You save all of your fruits and vegetables, compost. Okay, you have to look at what's in your compost. Allergens, we talked a little bit about those. Nutrient concerns, are they good or bad? Dietary components, supplements really, or product tampering, where you go buy something and it's already been opened. You know, we have all these safety measures that if you go buy a jar of tomato sauce, you're gonna make spaghetti that night, and you go buy a jar of spaghetti sauce. When you open it, what should you hear? Pop. Okay, that is canned under heat. Pressure causes the little cylinder in the lid to shrink. Okay, or you should be able to pop it. If you buy that jar of spaghetti sauce and you're standing there in line to pay for it, and you push it on your thumb, push down on your thumb, and it goes, you better leave it there. Okay, if you buy a can, and it's what we call a puffer, instead of the lid of the can being nice and flat, it's like that. You want to return it. You don't want to open it. It's contaminated. Okay, if you buy canned products that have a crease along the rim or the seal, return them. Okay, those are easy products to contaminate. Product tampering, people put things in. These are just, and I'm really not going to do much here. I want to show you some other things. These are some of the things that you find in the protection plan. Okay, and what the FDA comes in and looks at, all the different aspects that go along with it. But what you see, what I want you to see, prevention, intervention, and response. Their plan. Prevention first, intervention second, if needed, response. Or if they simply go into a plan, prevention, intervention, and response. Identify what can be wrong and what goes there, so we trust. And then look at health implications. If you've never heard of this group, Center for Science and Public Interest, they're a publicly traded company that they're kind of like the consumer watchdog out there. They publish lots of stuff. They publish a monthly newsletter that's full of things. Okay, so an example, eggs. Okay, you've got hens, you produce them on the farm, then you clean and package in a processing plant, they run through and they get washed off. Okay, then they get candled to see the inside of the egg. Okay, then they package it, they transport them to wholesalers, and then they go to restaurants where they use them, they go to institutions, and they go to your home in that process. Okay, USDA, Health Inspection and Service, checks on the breeding of the hens and the production of the eggs. Okay, they visit, the farm. They visit the place where they're raised. All right, cleaning and processing, agricultural monitoring service, Food and Drug Administration, food safety inspection services for the cleaning and packaging. Transportation, retail outlets to retail outlets, FDA. All right, handling and preparation in restaurants, state agricultural and health departments. They come out and they do the restaurant inspections. So somebody's watching, somebody's checking. Most common thing with eggs is salmonella. Just the natural process of things is how they're contaminated with that in what we see. Okay. And those are some of the references I used. That's quick. Any questions? Got any questions? Anything else?
How does food poisoning play into this?
Food poisoning can occur because a product is mishandled. First point is, it's not food poisoning. The correct term is called foodborne illness, because the food does not poison you. You get ill because you ate food that contained either a bacteria, an ingredient, or something that is bad. So they always used to call it food poisoning. People always did that. But it's really not poisoning. It's a foodborne infection or a foodborne intoxication, so we call it foodborne illness. That's the term you'll hear more about today. That's where it comes in. We all eat something, we get sick, we go to the hospital informs the health department investigates. That's foodborne illness. Okay. But a lot of what's related to foodborne illness results in product recalls. We all go out and buy contaminated milk, we get sick, we notify the producer. The producer says, okay, any milk that was produced these 4 days, we're going to recall. And that's your association and your tie in there. And then looking at prevention of foodborne illness and inspection services, that's a whole nother jump to the side of this particular topic. It's an interesting one, but it's a jump to the side. Any others? Yes.
How much of what becomes recalled is reactionary versus precautionary? How much is it of the consumer
Well, I don't know how to
policy?
answer that
Okay.
one. Precautionary is going to be where the manufacturer comes out and says, I think we found a problem, so we want to pull this off. Reactionary is probably going to be where there's been an issue with it. So I'm going to say maybe 50-50. I've never read any or looked for any statistics on that.
And who fits the bill with all of that? Of like, I mean, those
Who do you
thousands
think?
of millions of pounds. I mean, the producer.
Really? Producer does in a way. Ultimately, who foots the bill?
Do we?
We do. Yeah, not directly. We foot the bill indirectly, because if a producer has to recall, think of ground beef. If they've got to recall, 100,000 pounds of ground beef, okay, somebody's got to make up that difference. Now, in some cases, there was a beef processing plant in Nebraska, processed ground beef, made ground beef into patties. Patties came out, tests showed that they were contaminated with E. coli. Company went in clean, redid their processing, tried to do everything. Nobody would buy their product anymore. They went out of business. So can be that effect. Ultimately, the manufacturer is going to include some recovery cost in the product that has to be eliminated. Because they recall these products, they cannot relabel them and sell them. Okay? It's just like you go to McDonald's and you buy a hamburger and they give you a bag with the wrong food in it, and you hand the bag back to them. By law, that bag's to go in the trash. It has crossed the counter, so it's to go in the trash. Yeah. But we ultimately do, it's just like anything else. If there's a recall in automobiles, sure, the manufacturer is tagged for a huge bill, then they add $1 to the price of the new car to recover that cost, or something like that.
So but when you would have to go, you said you just bought all this stuff off their rack, is that they have to reimburse?
They do not have to. Most stores will. If you buy, if there's the Sugar Pops recall. All right, if you took your box back in, they gave you the box.
No, I mean when you, as an inspector, not an inspector, as a hand of whatever corporation is doing, or whatever.
Oh, when I did all the recall
Yeah.
work, they reimbursed me.
Okay.
The company paid me back. Now, I'm sure the company was paid for, was paid by the company who had the recall. Yeah, no, I did not do
No,
that.
I
out
knew,
of
I knew
business
you didn't know
purposes.
where the money, and
Yeah.
then, I had something else I'm thinking of. Oh, with health insurance, so let's say like people do end up getting sick or something, is there a point where those producers or wherever the fault is have to pay for that, and where does that?
That's where the courts come in.
Okay,
That's where the courts come in. There has, somehow, somebody's got to show where the fault was. And in many times, that is very difficult to do. You can trace it back, but that's very difficult to do. And you don't hear a lot about that because people who get that kind of coverage from a company or something, a lot of times you sign a non-disclosure agreement that they reimbursed you for your health costs. So you sign a non-disclosure agreement so you can't talk about it. Now, if it's a national thing and it's traced back or something like that, there's usually some sort of manufacturer settlement involved where they'll say, look, you know, if you had these costs, we will absorb some of those costs. That manufacturer has to be very careful because if I'm the manufacturer and I agree to cover your costs, I'm admitting fault. Then that's why we have lawyers. Okay, I don't know if anybody in here pre-law or whatever. I have lots of friends that are lawyers, and I say, that's how come you guys make good living. Yeah, that's, you start to get into litigation with those. Who was actually at fault, why, how come you ate it, got sick, I ate it, I didn't get sick. So then you start to get all of those issues about how the product is actually involved. There's never a simple answer to any of those. Anything else? Thanks for coming. Oh, yeah.
It might be kind of similar, but, like I know in livestock for sheep, they came on copper, and so there was like this big deal with the feed company that they didn't clean out of that before they did the next feed, and a bunch of them died. How do they go about like saying how much the animal was actually worth? Do you like know anything about that? Like,
Market
you know,
value.
It uses market value?
Market value.
Oh,
You know, but at the point in time, so you're feeding out cattle, all right, and you're feeding out yearlings. The market value of that versus a fed out beef, there's gonna be a difference. But you look at market value because that's what the consumer or the producer lost.
Well, these were all like show livestock, so like
Yeah.
the rams that died, they were thousands of dollars.
Yeah, I would know how to do that. Pets that often get sick and they can go back and prove it's basically, okay, what's a new pet cost? That's kind of that. Then you can sue them for, what do we call it? Emotional distress and those types of things. Yeah. Okay, I hope I didn't disrupt anybody's lunch or future.
Maybe salad talk was a little.